As the audience may know, for weeks and weeks now, we've been dealing with tariffs, and recently there was in Switzerland, the US and China came to a kind of what the media, Western media, is calling a truce, a pause, so to speak, in at least the massive tariffs that the United States attempted to impose on China, over 145%. Now, though, the US Commerce Department, and I'll read the report from Reuters, issued guidance stating that the use of Huawei's powerful Ascend chips would be restricted, quote unquote, anywhere in the world, and that any company that uses these chips would be a violation of US export controls. Could you talk about this? It appears that even though the United States seems to have needed to walk back on tariffs, there still is this overall strategy economically that includes what we, during the Biden administration, called the chip war.
If we look at the world of today, the greatest predictability is the unpredictability of the Trump administration. If we really sift through all these confusing things, I think probably President Trump and his team started on some presumptions. One is that by imposing maximum tariff on China, China will crumble. Another indulgence of Washington may be, well, I can use tariff to block or to embargo some, if not all, the Chinese exports to the United States, while the US export to China will have a free walk in the China market. No, that's fantasy. If you want to block all the Chinese export to the United States, there will be no more export of the US product to the China market. So you are talking about locking yourself out of the China market, which is the largest market in the world today and will become more and more important in the coming years and coming decades. Washington has been threatening Walmart, eat up all the tariffs, don't pass it on to the consumers. That's not market practice. If you collect tariffs by the government and the traders like Walmart need to pass on the cost to the end users, eventually it's spread around by all the American people need to pay the tariffs eventually. It will cause inflation. And I think it will make life for people in the middle class bracket or even lower income bracket even more difficult for the Americans. So I think from the Chinese perspective, this trade war will cause a lot of difficulty and hardships for the Chinese exporters. But I think we will stabilize the situation because there is something more than economic losses and gains analysis, because China really views this in a very philosophical way. The American this time is trying to destroy free trade. China wants to protect free trade. So we need to stand firm in protecting free trade. China does this not just for its own benefit. China is doing this for all countries' benefit, as well as for the fundamental interest of the American people. The American people don't want to suffer this shock of paying extraordinary amount of tariffs being collected by the US government. So I think what happened in Geneva a couple of weekends ago was the right thing. It means there are still people with sound mind and rationality in Washington. And I think Washington should really come back to its senses. Tariff war does not solve the problem. You view the world in a very twisted way. It is not a reality test. You need to see the world as it is, composed of about 200 separate independent nations with their own sovereignty and territorial integrity. Each has its own power to make decisions for itself. How can you say the United States orders all the countries not to use Huawei products? No one in the world has empowered you in that way. And that will only backfire because it means you are vulnerable. It means you are actually internally very weak. It means that you are very much afraid of technological innovations. It means you really believe you are not going to win this competition. Competition is good, actually. Competition on equal terms, on fair terms, should be encouraged because That means mankind is still moving forward, making progress. No one has a monopoly on technological innovation. No one can monopolize creativity of humankind.
Maybe talk about some ways it has already backfired, because I see it in the Western mainstream media everywhere now in reaction to the trade war, in reaction to the chip war that has seemingly escalated in lieu of now this pause in the trade war. And one of the big narratives that is now being pushed, almost to my surprise, is that, it's not going to be China that suffers the most. It is actually the United States that will be left behind. How has it backfired, particularly in this area of technology, which China has, of course, grown leaps and bounds over the past several decades?
As a matter of fact, China actually spent more on importing chips than importing crude oil from the rest of the world. China did not worry about the chips. China itself was one of the largest producer of chips, mostly on the lower end side, that's for sure. And China also export chips. China was, before the chips war, one of the biggest exporters of chips. But that changed completely because under Trump and under President Biden and now under President Trump again, they focus on semiconductor chips. They want to weaponize chips. They want to deny China's access to chips, especially on the more advanced side. Now, what will be the end result? Do you think China will crumble? Do you think China will say, oh my God, I give up. I no longer develop chips on my own? No, it forces China to become self-reliant and self-independent. That forces the 1.4 billion Chinese people, very much united, very much focused on achieving development, for example, and promoting peace, to develop their own way of developing semiconductor chips of all kinds. So the simple story is very simple. Work with China on equal terms. Don't deny China access, because if you try to deny China access, if you try to choke China, you end up with a much more formidable competitor.